A Lobster Tale. Green Marlin Gals, Book 3. C. Z. Kincaid. Chapter 1. The Last Haul. The light went first, the way it always did this time of year. The sun, dropping behind the spruce on the far shore before 5 o'clock, had properly finished being afternoon, and he worked on by feel as much as sight, his hands finding the familiar shapes of trap and line and buoy in the deepening blue without needing to look for them. 60 years on the water taught a man's hands to see for themselves eventually. The wind had come up hard out of the northeast an hour ago, sharp enough to cut through his jacket, and the radio band on his ear defenders had been rattling off warnings about it since noon, the same tired forecaster's voice he'd been listening to for decades, rising and falling under a thin skin of static. Small craft advisory, seas building through the evening, mariners advised to seek harbor before dark. He wasn't troubled by it. He knew this water the way he knew his own hands, every mood of it, and he had no plans to be out on it once the light was properly gone. Just this last trap to rehead, the wire gone soft at one corner where a big one had worked it all summer, and then home. He thought, working the wire, of the meeting 3 nights past, and the fear in the room that hadn't quite finished being fear before it started curdling into something meaner. He thought of the ones who'd stood up talking about boat payments and school shoes and the specific exhaustion of watching a season's whole living get bought out from under you, a license at a time, and how he hadn't blamed a single one of them for it. Not really, even while some old stubborn part of him refused to let the fear win the argument outright. He thought of the others still holding the line alongside him. The small, scattered brotherhood of men too stubborn or too proud or too tied to this water to sell, and the loneliness there was in being one of the last few standing somewhere everybody else had already quietly agreed to leave. Somebody's going to get hurt over this, he thought, not for the first time, and not without a certain grim clarity about which direction the hurt was most likely to come from. He didn't let himself finish the thought. It wasn't a fair thing to dwell on, not on an evening this ordinary, with a boat under him and a trap in his hands, and nothing happening yet that couldn't still turn out to be nothing. He bent back to the trap instead, wire cold and stiff under his fingers, the radio muttering its warning into his ear defenders, the light gone the flat gray that came just before true dark. His hand found the red life preserver hanging from its hook at the stern, the same automatic check he made without thinking every evening before the light went, a habit worn so deep into the motion of his hands he could no longer have said when it started. He thought for just a moment of somebody waiting on shore for him, the way he always did at this hour, whether he meant to or not, a window with the light left on, a certain way of listening for an engine that would tell her long before she could see him that he was almost home. The boards behind him creaked. Not the ordinary creak of the boat settling against her fenders, a sound he'd have known blindfolded after 60 years of nights just like this one. This was different, weighted wrong, the specific give of a boot finding a plank that wasn't built to expect it. His hands went still on the wire. He had time to register distantly that the radio had drifted off its station again, the forecaster's voice thinning into static, and time to think that he ought to turn around and see who'd come down to the wharf so late and so quiet, without so much as a hello carried over the wind. He never got the chance. Chapter 2. The Winning Ticket. The Green Marlin smelled the way it always smelled on a Friday evening. Hot butter and lime and the brine of the raw bar, with the ceiling fans turning lazy circles overhead and the neon marlin out front just beginning to flicker to life against the dusk. The evening had that particular Florida thickness to it, heat still radiating up off the parking lot blacktop, even as the light went gold and then rose, and the air conditioning inside hit Nancy's bare arms the moment she came through the door, goosebumps rising before she'd even found her seat. Last round before the airport, people, Casey called from behind the bar, already pulling Carol's double bourbon before anyone had ordered it. One ice cube, I know. You're a treasure, Carol said, finding her usual chair without needing to look for it, her hand skimming the back of it first, confirming the familiar worn grain of the wood before she settled. I'm a bartender who pays attention, Casey said. There's a difference, but I'll take the compliment. He set the glass down with a small flourish and something in his face, the easy, unguarded pleasure of a man who genuinely liked the people he served, softened the whole exchange into something warmer than the words alone carried. Marcy arrived a moment later with a tray balanced on one hip, sliding a vodka tonic with lime in front of Mary, and a Pinot Grigio in front of Nancy without being asked. The order so old and so settled it had stopped being an order at all and become simply the truth of the table. So, Marcy said, pulling up the fourth chair and turning it backward to straddle it, which she only did when she intended to stay a while. Her eyebrows were already climbing toward her hairline, the look she wore when she'd been waiting all week to ask something. I know you've told me this 100 times, but remind me, how long are you gone for? Depends how much trouble we get into, Nancy said. Open return, technically. Bar Harbor. Open return. Marcy shook her head slowly, the way she'd been shaking it since the email arrived months ago, each time with the same pleasurable disbelief, her mouth pulling sideways into something between a grin and pure skepticism. All because you entered a sweepstakes on your phone at this table. It took 4 minutes, Nancy said. She said that every time, Carol told Marcy. I don't think she'll ever stop saying it. I won't, Nancy agreed. It took 4 minutes, and now we're going to Maine. I intend to say it until it stops being remarkable, and I'm not convinced it ever will. Mary turned her glass slowly, ice clinking faintly against vodka and tonic, and felt the familiar lift that came before every one of these trips. Equal parts excitement and a small, persistent flutter she'd learned not to examine too closely, because examining it never told her anything useful. It was just there, every time, the way weather was there. Though this time she thought she knew its name and did not say it. She texted Skip that afternoon, in fact, a photo of her half-packed suitcase with the caption off to Maine. No promises I'll come back able to eat anything but lobster. And he'd written back within the minute, he always did, which still, after all these years, struck her as something worth noticing. Send me something ridiculous. I mean it. The more ridiculous, the better. She'd smiled at her phone in a way that felt, even alone in her own kitchen, a little foolish and a little wonderful in equal measure. You're doing the smile, Nancy said, watching her over the rim of her wine glass, one eyebrow lifted in the dry, assessing way she watched most things. What smile? The Skip smile. You've had it twice since we sat down. I have not. You absolutely have, Marcy said. It's very cute. Tell Skip I said hello, and that if he doesn't visit soon, I'm charging him rent on the empty chair at this table. He knows, Mary said. We discuss it, at length, regularly. She said it lightly, the way she said most things about Skip in front of people, holding the real weight of it just out of sight the way you hold a lit candle cupped against wind, not hidden exactly, just protected. I looked up Maine in October, Carol said, in the foliage. Supposedly the whole coast goes red and gold. Red and gold doesn't cover it, Mary said. You have to have stood in it. She said it lightly and let it go by and did not explain how she knew, though something crossed her face for just a moment, a softness around the eyes, quickly smoothed over, that Carol, had she been able to see it, might have asked about. Lobster everywhere, too, Carol said. I intend to eat my weight in it. You say that about every food in every state, Nancy pointed out. And I have never once been wrong to." Marcy laughed and reached across to steal one of Mary's fries without asking, the way she'd been doing for 2 years now. "I'm jealous. I haven't been anywhere since my cousin's wedding in Tampa, and even that felt like an expedition." "Come with us," Mary said, only half joking. "Someone has to keep this place standing," Marcy said, "and that someone is apparently me, since Casey can't be trusted to remember anyone's order who isn't already sitting at this table." "I remember plenty of orders," Casey said from behind the bar without looking up. "Name one." "Yours. Whatever you're drinking when you're complaining about me." "Speaking of leaving Florida," Nancy said, "we picked a good week to be getting out. The crabs are terrible this year." Marcy groaned, dropping her head back theatrically. "Don't." A customer tracked one clear across the dining room on his shoe Tuesday. Big blue fella must have walked in the side door like he had a reservation. "It's the rain we've had," Marcy said. "They're always worse after a wet stretch, and it's been soaking all month. My whole back patio was crawling one morning last week. I counted 11 before I gave up counting and went back inside." "11," Carol said. "That's nothing. Tell them about the jungle trail, Mary." "Oh, the jungle trail." Mary set her glass down and something in her posture straightened, the gathering of a woman about to tell a story she'd already told several times and enjoyed every time anyway. "Nancy and I drove up the jungle trail 2 weeks ago. You know it. That old sand road up on the barrier island runs through the wildlife refuge. I used to take Chris up there when he was small to look for birds. Well, we went up in the afternoon and the whole road was moving." "Moving," Nancy said, with the flat emphasis of someone confirming a thing she still didn't quite believe, her mouth thinning into a line that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite a grimace. "The entire road. You couldn't see the sand for the crabs. Thousands of them, all headed the same direction, toward the water. Big ones. The blue land crabs, some of them with a claw the size of your thumb held up like they were shaking a fist at the car. We stopped," Mary said. "We sat there a good 10 minutes hoping they'd clear. They did not clear." "They do not clear," Carol agreed knowingly, though she hadn't been there, her chin lifting with the certainty she brought to second-hand facts she'd nonetheless decided to fully believe. "They have somewhere to be, and they do not care one bit about your car. And you can't go around them, because it's a one-lane sand road with a ditch on both sides," Nancy said. "And you can't wait them out, because there is no out. They just keep coming. So eventually you have to just—" She winced, her whole face contracting briefly at the memory. "Go, slowly, and try not to listen." "The sound," Mary said and shuddered delicately, her shoulders drawing up toward her ears. "That's the part I won't forget. Like driving over a field of walnuts." Mary cried a little, Nancy said. "I did not cry. I got emotional about the loss of life. There's a difference." Marcy had both hands over her mouth, eyes wide above them. "That's the most horrifying thing I've ever heard." "It's an annual event," Carol said serenely, entirely unbothered, turning her glass a slow quarter turn on the table. "Every fall, once the rains come and the moon's right, the whole population marches for the water to spawn. Been happening on that island since long before there was a road there to inconvenience them. We're the ones in their way, not the other way around." "That is a very enlightened attitude for a woman who once made me carry one out of her kitchen with a colander and a spatula," Mary said. "That was a house guest," Carol said with the dignity of someone drawing a very fine but very important legal distinction. "Entirely different situation. A crab in your kitchen has crossed a line. A crab on the jungle trail is simply living its life, and I respect it. There were antly and pits all along the shoulder there, too, if you looked, Mary said. Do you remember those, from when Chris was small? Little funnel traps in the loose sand, no bigger than a thimble, and something down at the bottom of each one just waiting. I remember you telling him the ants never even knew the ground had turned against them, Nancy said, until they were already sliding in. I did say that. It made an impression, apparently, because you still remember it 20 years later. Mary turned her glass again, watching the ice settle, her expression gone briefly distant and thoughtful. I've always thought that was the frightening part, not the trap itself. How ordinary the sand looked, right up until it wasn't. And once something started sliding, Mary said more quietly, the harder it fought, the faster it seemed to go. Well, I won't miss any of it, Nancy said. Not a land crab or an ant lion in sight the whole time we're gone. I hear the worst thing you'll step on up there is a moose. The moose are bad this time of year, too, Mary said darkly. It's the rut. Everything's the rut with you lately. It's biology, Nancy. Marcy pointed her pen at Casey in a gesture that suggested this round, at least, belonged to him, and turned back to the table. When do you fly? Tomorrow, early, Nancy said. Out of Vero, up to Boston, and then a little hop up to Bangor. Then we drive. That's a lot of getting there. That's half the trip, Mary said. You don't get the good parts without the road in between. Outside, the evening had gone properly dark. The Marlin sign, steady and bright above the door, headlights sliding by on US 1, and the palms along the highway going to black silhouettes against the last of the light. Behind them, the raw bar kept up its easy Friday clatter, ice and shucked shells, somebody laughing at the far end, the screen door letting in a warm gust of fried batter and salt every time it swung, the low hum of conversation rising and falling like something with its own tide. Mary looked at her two oldest friends, Carol with her head tipped toward the sounds of the room, reading it the way she read everything, her fingers resting lightly on the stem of her glass. Nancy, already, unconsciously, checking the time on her phone, her jaw set the way it set when some part of her mind had already left the table and gone ahead to the airport. The flight, the whole itinerary laid out and ready, and felt that same flutter again. Sharper this time, though she still couldn't have said why. Her phone buzzed once against the table. Skip, this time a photo back. His own suitcase, half-packed, an absurd number of Hawaiian shirts folded on top. Practicing for when you finally let me tag along on one of these, the message read. Say the word. Soon, she typed back, and meant it more than one word usually held, and slid the phone away before anyone could ask what she was smiling about again. To Maine, she said instead, lifting her glass. To Maine, Carol and Nancy echoed, and their glasses met in the soft, familiar clink that had started more adventures than any of them had ever planned for. Marcy stood, balancing the tray against her hip as she headed for another table. Your table will be waiting for you, she called over her shoulder. It wasn't the usual same time next week, but they all understood what she meant. Count on it, Mary called back, and meant it the way she always meant it, without any idea yet of everything that would happen before she got to say it again. Chapter 3. The Long Way Up. The flight out of Vero Beach Regional was small and full of people in Disney shirts and people in golf shirts, in roughly equal measure, and Nancy had the window seat by virtue of having simply taken it before anyone else could object. You could let Mary have it, Carol said from the middle seat, where she had no real preference either way. Mary had the window in New Mexico, Nancy said. I'm not unreasonable. I keep track. She does, Mary confirmed from the aisle. It's a little frightening, actually. The flight to Boston was short and unremarkable, except for the moment somewhere over Georgia, when Nancy looked out at a stretch of green-brown coastline and went quiet for a beat, her mouth pulling briefly to one side in the way it did when a thought had caught her by surprise. "It's strange," she said, apropos of nothing, "how different heading north feels from heading west. I couldn't tell you why." She didn't say anything else about it, and Mary, glancing over, decided not to ask, because some things in Nancy's voice meant later, maybe, and this had been one of them. Logan Airport was a different scale of place entirely. Wide, gray, full of accents none of them recognized and announcements for gates and terminals they weren't in, and the layover gave them just enough time for a rushed cup of coffee and a soft pretzel the size of a steering wheel, which Carol insisted on holding herself the whole way to the gate. "So, I know exactly how big my regret is going to be." While they waited, Mary excused herself to a gift shop crowded with Lobster keychains and Red Sox caps, and came back a few minutes later tucking something small into the outside pocket of her purse. "What was that?" Carol asked, head tilted in the way that meant she'd heard the zipper and was cataloging it. "Emergency supplies," Mary said. "She's down to her last bottle," Nancy said, not even looking up from her coffee, the way you'd mentioned that somebody was running low on gas. "Has been since Tuesday. I heard her rationing it into the hotel coffee maker." "It was one splash," Mary said, with as much dignity as she could gather. "One. A little Irish cream in a cup of bad coffee is not a character flaw." "Nobody said flaw," Carol said serenely. "I said nothing at all." "You were about to." "I was thinking about lunch. You're very suspicious of me for a blind woman." Mary patted her purse closed, satisfied, a fresh bottle safely tucked in beside the old, nearly empty one she wasn't quite ready to throw away yet, the way she never quite was. It was such an old habit by now that none of them remarked on it much anymore. A little something in her coffee, wherever she happened to be drinking it, home or away, restaurant or gas station, poured with the practiced discretion of a woman who'd been doing it since before either of her traveling companions had known her. Carol had stopped asking about it years ago. Nancy had stopped pretending not to notice. The final hop, on a plane small enough that the flight attendant did the safety demonstration standing in the aisle with her arms nearly brushing both sides, dropped them into Bangor a little after 11, into a terminal that could have fit in the St. Helens parking lot with room for the Sunday Mass overflow, with a moose head mounted over the rental car counter, and a gift shop selling whoopie pies the size of hubcaps. Nancy pushed through the terminal doors into the pickup lane and had her glasses halfway off her face, 2 fingers already reaching for the hem of her shirt to wipe them clear before she caught herself. 30 years of walking out of air-conditioned buildings into Florida afternoons had trained the motion into her hand so thoroughly it fired on its own, the lenses expecting that first thick wall of humidity to fog them white the instant she cleared the door. It didn't come. The air outside was merely cool and dry and smelled of jet fuel and cut grass, her glasses sitting clear and unbothered on her nose, and she stood there for a second with her shirt hem still bunched in one hand, faintly foolish, recalibrating. "What are you doing?" Mary asked. "Nothing." Nancy let her shirt fall and pushed her glasses back up properly. "Habit." Nancy stopped in front of the moose and studied it with the frank, assessing look she gave most things, head tilting slowly as she took in the full span of the antlers. "That," she said, "is a genuinely enormous animal." "Bull moose can run 1,400 pounds, said the man behind the rental counter without looking up from his keyboard. "You'll likely see 1 or 2 for real, this time of year. They come down out of the woods for the wet ground." "Wonderful," Carol said. "Something else for Nancy to photograph through a windshield at 60 miles an hour." "I resent that," Nancy said. "I resent it because it's accurate." Though for the record, my New Mexico photos of that alleged Bigfoot came out perfectly clear, and nobody's ever once thanked me for my documentation. Nobody's thanked you, Carol said, because it was a bush. It was a large, unusual bush. The rental car, a sensible silver SUV that smelled faintly of pine air freshener and somebody else's peppermint gum, was waiting in a lot still glistening from rain that had apparently just stopped. Nancy took the keys without asking, the way she always did, and Mary didn't argue, the way she never did, and slid into the front passenger seat out of the same old habit that put her there whenever the three of them traveled, close enough to narrate the world going by for Carol, who settled into the back with her window cracked before the doors had even shut. "What is that?" Carol said after a moment, head tilted. Not a question so much as a working theory she was waiting to confirm. "What's what?" Mary asked, twisting around in her seat. "That smell. Cold and sharp, and a little bit like rain that hasn't decided whether it's finished." Carol breathed in again. "It's not like anything in Florida." "Pine, probably," Nancy said, pulling out of the lot. "Or spruce. I don't actually know the difference. It's both, this time of year, and balsam fir besides," Carol said, settling back, her face turned toward the window as though it could tell her something the glass itself was keeping. "Whatever it is, I like it already." The drive south out of Bangor took them through a stretch of highway that could only have been Maine, gas stations, a tractor supply, a diner with a hand-painted sign advertising live lobster and whoopie pies in letters that suggested the two were, in this part of the world, of roughly equal civic importance. A faded old soda advertisement painted directly onto the brick side of a hardware store. Moxie, in tall red letters gone soft and chalky with 50 years of weather, before the road narrowed and the trees came in close again, and Route 1 unspooled ahead of them, blue water flashing between the pines on their left. "There," Mary said softly, and didn't need to say more. They'd all felt it, the moment a trip stopped being travel and started being the place itself. It was Carol, 20 minutes later, who said, "We should stop. I want lobster before we even check into the hotel. I refuse to wait." "We haven't even had breakfast yet," Mary said. "It's afternoon somewhere," Carol said, which had become a family joke without anyone quite agreeing to make it one. "Then we'll fix that." Mary was already watching the roadside, and a mile on, she found what she was half looking for without having known she was looking. "There, slow down." "There what?" A hand-painted board on 2 posts at the edge of a gravel lot, white letters gone chalky with weather. Longstaffs, and under it, smaller, as if it were an afterthought anybody local wouldn't need. Lobsters. No hours, no phone number, no stars. "That one," Mary said. "That's the kind you want." "How do you know?" Carol asked. "You just know," Mary said, which wasn't an answer, and was. Nancy was already turning into the lot, gravel popping under the tires, and that was that. Longstaff's was a low wood-frame shed, its shingles, gone the soft gray of everything on that coast that had ever met salt air, and a scatter of weathered picnic tables on a patch of grass above a working cove, a stovepipe throwing wood smoke sideways in the wind, and a couple of pickups nosed in at angles, all of them with main plates. No dock full of tourists. No gift shop. The moment Nancy cut the engine, Carol had her window all the way down. "Oh, that's the thing," she said. "That's the smell I was trying to place at the airport, except now there's salt in it, and something briny and green underneath. Seaweed, I think, and wood smoke." "That's a boiling pot," Mary said. "A real one. They're cooking them right there in the seawater." There was no inside to speak of. Just a window in the side of the shed, and beside it a board with the entire menu on it, which took Mary about 2 seconds to read because it had 3 things on it. Lobster, soda, chips, a cooler of cans clinking with ice, a bottle or two of Moxie standing out among the cokes and root beers like a local flag planted in enemy territory, a rack of chips clipped to the wall, and through the window a great steaming pot and a tank of lobsters in slow, patient stacks, claws banded, and Tenny moving in some private conversation. Mary found she couldn't quite stop watching. "3 things," Carol said, delighted when Mary read her the board. "A menu you can hold in your head. I trust this place completely already." "No lobster rolls?" Nancy said, scanning the board a second time. "No, just lobster." The man at the window was somewhere past 70, sun-weathered, big-knuckled hands and an apron that had clearly seen every kind of butter and brine a person could survive, deep creases fanning out from eyes that had spent 60 years squinting at weather coming in off the water. "Al," he said by way of greeting, the way you'd state the weather. An old yellow dog lifted its head from a patch of sun by the propane tanks, decided they weren't worth the trouble of standing for, and went back to sleep. He took their order with the brisk warmth of a man who had boiled 10,000 lobsters before this one and would boil 10,000 more. 3 whole, boiled while they waited, 3 sodas, a bag of chips to split, because that was the menu, and the menu was enough. Carol asked for hers whole and uncracked. She wanted, she said, to feel the shape of one before anyone took it apart for her. "First time up this way?" Al asked, making change from a coffee can. "First time in Maine, period," Nancy said. "Well, you picked a good spot to start." Al nodded toward the cove, where a lobster boat was coming in slow to a mooring, and something in his weathered face eased, unhurried and pleased, the look of a man watching a thing he never tired of watching. "My grandfather sold lobsters off this same patch of grass. Same name on the sign, too. Never saw reason to put anything more on it. Folks around here know what we do." He handed Nancy her change, and behind him, through the propped-open back door, Nancy caught a glimpse of a photograph taped to the wall by the register. Al, considerably younger, arm around a woman in a sundress, both of them squinting into some long-ago summer sun. The ones that need a sign to tell them usually aren't staying long. He nodded toward the boat again, easing in toward a mooring not 30 yards off. "Half the boats up and down this shore still bring me their overflow. Cash in hand. No middleman, no paperwork, same as my grandfather ran it. There's folks who'd rather that arrangement didn't exist anymore, but I'm too old and too stubborn to care much what they'd rather." "Good," Carol said. "I distrust fancy on principle." They ate at a weathered picnic table above the cove, gulls wheeling and complaining overhead, the cold of the lobster meat and the warmth of the butter doing something to Mary's whole chest that she didn't have words for yet and didn't try to find. Carol held her lobster in both hands for a long moment before she ate any of it, turning it over, running a thumb along the ridged shell, the strange architecture of the claw, her face gone soft and inward with concentration. "It's so much more, itself, than I expected," she said. "Does that make sense?" "It does," Mary said, and meant it. Nancy, meanwhile, had gone quiet the way she went quiet when she was cataloging something. Not boredom, not distraction. Mary had learned over the years and the miles to recognize it. Nancy's old instincts doing what they'd always done, sorting the scene into background and signal even when there was no scene that needed sorting yet. She was watching a lobsterman offload his catch at the cove's edge, watching the way Al greeted 3 separate regulars by name in the time it took the gals to eat one course, her eyes moving over the whole little tableau with a careful, unhurried attention that had nothing to do with hunger, snagging without quite meaning to on a battered pickup nosed in at the edge of the gravel, its bed loaded with what looked like moving gear, a folded dolly, coiled rope, and, thrown over the tailgate where the afternoon sun caught it, a life preserver gone the bright, unmistakable red of a fire truck. "You're doing the thing," Mary said. "What thing?" "The thing where you watch everyone like you're waiting for the call to come in." Nancy considered it, but did not deny it. Old habits. This is supposed to be a vacation. It is a vacation. I'm allowed to enjoy a vacation and also notice things. Those aren't opposites. Carol made a soft, knowing sound into her soda. That is not the same thing as taking your work with you. No. Nancy watched the lobster men ease another crate onto the dock, and her eyes drifted, without her quite deciding to send them there, back to Al's truck at the edge of the gravel, the red life preserver still catching the afternoon light where it lay across the tailgate. Something about it snagged at her, small and wordless, the way a single wrong note snags at a piece of music you don't otherwise know well enough to name what's off. It's just how my mind travels. Mary smiled. Well, let's hope it gets a nice quiet vacation anyway. She said nothing more because she suspected, though she would not have said it aloud, not yet, not on the first day, that Nancy was right more often than either of them gave her credit for. Whatever Maine had waiting, Nancy would likely see it coming before the rest of them knew to look. Chapter 4. Perry's Nut House. 40 minutes further down Route 1, in a stretch of road thick with antique shops and a church with a steeple so white it looked freshly painted that morning, Nancy slowed the car without being asked. "What?" Nancy eased toward the shoulder. "There's a giant squirrel on the side of the road. I mean genuinely giant, 12 feet, easily. Bright brown, holding an acorn the size of a beach ball, and it has the most aggressively cheerful face I've ever seen on anything. It's grinning like it's won something," Mary added, twisting around to look. "Rising right up out of a gift shop parking lot like it's been standing guard there for decades." "That," Nancy said, already signaling, "is something I need to see up close." Perry's Nut House turned out to be exactly as advertised, and somehow also more. A low roadside building crowded with painted animal sculptures, an actual full-sized fiberglass elephant standing sentinel near the entrance, bins of fudge and salted nuts and saltwater taffy in colors that didn't occur in nature, postcards from decades the gals could all remember, and a few they couldn't. A teenager behind the register was eating a sandwich and watching something on his phone with one earbud in, entirely unimpressed by the menagerie around him, entirely unbothered by anything short of the building catching fire. "I want a picture with the elephant," Carol announced. "You can't see the elephant," Nancy pointed out, not unkindly. "I can feel the elephant," Carol said. "That's better. Take the picture." Mary obliged, and Carol stood with one hand resting on the elephant's painted flank, fingers tracing the seams of the fiberglass, her face turned not toward the camera, but toward the texture under her palm, entirely absorbed, entirely happy. "What's it feel like?" Nancy asked. "Like a very large, very smooth dog," Carol said, "that someone forgot to give fur." Mary wandered a little apart from them, down an aisle crowded with the sincere ugliness of roadside attraction merchandise, a shelf of moose-shaped mugs, a rack of postcards, a bin of small carved loons, looking, without quite admitting to herself that she was looking, for something ridiculous enough to satisfy a man 3,000 miles away who had specifically requested ridiculous. She found it 2 aisles over, a taxidermied-looking fabric moose head, wall-mountable, with an expression of profound and unearned dignity, wearing a tiny knitted Christmas sweater despite the fact that it was October and there was no possible occasion that called for it. She held it up, testing its weight, and found herself laughing out loud, alone in the aisle, a sudden unguarded sound that drew a look from the teenager at the register. "What's that?" Nancy called from over by the elephant. Nothing, Mary called back and carried it to the register, already composing in her head the message she'd send once it was safely arranged. Found your Christmas present 4 months early. You're welcome. It has a sweater. The registered teenager, when she asked, said they'd box it and ship it straight to California for a few dollars more. No trouble at all. So she wrote out Skip's address on a slip of paper and let it go, unencumbered, already looking forward to the day it would show up on his porch with no warning at all. On their way to the register, a woman behind the fudge counter waved them over with a butter knife and a tray of toothpick-speared squares, the unhurried generosity of somebody who'd clearly been offering samples to strangers for 30 years and never once tired of watching a face change when it took the first bite. Maple walnut, she said. Panouche, dark chocolate sea salt. Don't be shy, there's more where that came from. Carol took the panouche first and went quiet the way she went quiet over food that surprised her, her whole face softening around the taste. Oh, she said, that's not chocolate at all, is it? It's something else entirely. Brown sugar and cream, the woman said. No cocoa in it at all. Old New England thing. Folks up here were making it before chocolate was easy to come by this far from anywhere. It tastes like caramel decided to be more serious about itself, Carol said, already reaching for a second piece. Nancy took the sea salt dark chocolate, sharp and bittersweet with a fine crunch of salt riding right on top, and Mary tried the maple walnut and declared it, around a mouthful, the reason New England was permitted to exist at all, which the woman behind the counter accepted as the compliment it was clearly intended to be. They left 20 minutes later with 2 pounds of fudge they hadn't planned on buying, and a postcard for Marcy, and, Mary noticed, though she didn't comment on it, Nancy lingering an extra moment at a rack near the door where a hand-lettered sign read, Local Schoodic Peninsula Honey, Maple Syrup, Blueberry Jam, beneath a small hand-drawn map of the coast east of Bar Harbor, dotted with names that meant nothing to any of them yet. Schoodic, Nancy said, half to herself, tracing one finger along the little inked peninsula. She paused at the narrow road drawn across it, as if committing the shape to memory. Quiet side of the park, the rental guy said. Maybe we'll get out there, Mary said. Maybe, Nancy agreed and put the map back, and none of them thought anything more of it, because there was nothing yet to think. It was nearly 5 when Bar Harbor finally opened up in front of them, a harbor full of moored boats swinging gently on their lines, a long lawn running down to the water, the whole town smelling of salt and fried dough and wood smoke, the mountains of Ucadia rising in layers of red and gold and granite gray just beyond the rooftops like sentinels standing guard. Carol had the window down again, head tilted toward the open air, taking it in the way she took in every new place. Not the view, which wasn't hers to have, but the whole living sound and smell of it. Gulls somewhere close, a halyard clinking against a mast, a fryer going in a kitchen with its door propped for the evening rush, salt and wood smoke and cold water all layered together. Oh, she said quietly, and her face had gone soft and unguarded in a way Mary had seen only a handful of times in 30 years of friendship. I like this town already, and I haven't even gotten out of the car. Their lodging was a white clapboard in 3 streets back from the water, with a wraparound porch and rocking chairs and a woman at the front desk named Patty, who handed them a laminated map of the island, a brochure for whale watching, and a warning delivered with the cheerful matter-of-factness of someone who said it 50 times a season, that the popovers at Jordan Pond House sold out by 2 most days. So they'd want to go early if they wanted any. Nancy, filling out the registration card while Patty talked, wrote the date the way she'd written it her whole life, month first, and Patty, glancing down to check it, laughed and turned the card around to show her. You'd be surprised how often I get this mixed up myself, this time of year," she said. "Half our guests this month are down from Quebec, and they write it day first, month second, opposite of us. Had a fellow last week nearly missed his own reservation because he read October 11th as the 10th of November instead of the 11th of October, and by the time he sorted it out, he was convinced we'd given his room away." "That seems like an easy thing to get backwards," Mary said. "It is, and it isn't only the guests," Patty said, cheerful about it in the way of someone who'd long since stopped being embarrassed by her own front desk's failures. "Our delivery schedule from the bakery in Ellsworth got flipped for 2 whole weeks last spring before anybody noticed, all because somebody wrote a date the Canadian way on a standing order, and nobody caught it. We had croissants showing up on days we didn't want them and nothing at all on the mornings we did." "Popovers," Carol repeated once they were settled in the room they were sharing, 3 beds and a view of a maple tree just starting to go red at its edges. "I like the sound of that already." "I read about it on the plane," Mary said. "They've been serving them the same way since the 1890s. Tea and popovers on the lawn, looking out at the pond." "1890s," Nancy said, sitting on the edge of her bed, pulling off her shoes. "That's older than most of the buildings back home, probably." "Older than all of them," Carol said. "Florida barely believes in the 1950s, let alone the 1890s. While Carol unpacked and Nancy went to investigate the shower pressure with the gravity she brought to hotel bathrooms, Mary sat on the edge of her own bed and called Skip, mostly because the light through the window had gone a gold that made her want to tell somebody about it. And there was only one somebody she wanted to tell. He picked up on the second ring. "How's Maine treating my girl?" "It's treating her very well," Mary said, and found, hearing his voice, that the whole day, the flight, the moosehead, the lobster, the giant squirrel, settled into place all at once, the way a good day always finally settled once you'd told someone who mattered about it. "I found you a Christmas present already, in October. You should be terrified." "I'm already terrified. Tell me everything." So, she told him, the abbreviated version, the version that fit into a phone call and not a whole evening, Longstaff's and the 3-item menu and the fiberglass elephant and Carol declaring the whole state trustworthy on the strength of a single lobster. And somewhere in the middle of it she looked out the window at the maple going red at its edges and the last of the daylight sliding gold over the rooftops of Bar Harbor, and felt something in her chest ease that she hadn't quite noticed was tight. "I miss you," she said, simpler than she usually let herself say it. "I'm having the best time, and some part of me keeps wanting to turn around and show you things." "So, show me next time," Skip said, easy as anything, the unhurried warmth in his voice as familiar to her by now as her own front door. "I meant that. About tagging along. Say the word whenever you're ready and I'll be on a plane." "Soon," Mary said again. And this time, alone in a room in Bar Harbor with the light going gold, she let herself mean it as fully as it deserved. "I hope so. Soon. I have a good feeling about this trip," she said once she'd hung up, more to the window than to either of her friends, and then laughed a little because she said that about every trip, and it was true every time, in ways that were not always comfortable and not always easy, but true. "You say that every time," Nancy said, emerging from the bathroom, not unkindly, echoing the thought exactly. "I do," Mary agreed, "and I haven't been wrong yet." Outside, the light was going gold and soft over the rooftops of Bar Harbor, and somewhere beyond the mountains on the quiet side of the peninsula, a freshly painted sign creaked very slightly on its hinges, though none of them were there yet to hear it. Chapter 5. The Culprit on the Porch. Nancy woke at 6, which was not unusual, and lay still a moment listening to the unfamiliar creaks of an old inn settling around her before she registered what had actually pulled her out of sleep. A soft, deliberate scraping sound, coming from somewhere just outside their window, followed by a small metallic clatter that was unmistakably a lid coming off something it shouldn't have come off of. She was up and at the window before she'd fully decided to be, some old dispatcher's instinct already cataloging the sound and filing it under investigate, do not panic, and found, in the gray pre-dawn light, absolutely nothing. The porch below sat empty, the wraparound railing catching the first thin edge of morning, and whatever had made the noise had apparently finished its business and gone. "What are you doing?" Mary mumbled from her bed, one eye open. "I heard something. You always hear something. It's your whole personality." "I resent that," Nancy said, already pulling on yesterday's jeans, "and I'm going to go find out what it was anyway." The porch, when she let herself out the side door into the cold morning air, told its own quiet story. The lidded tin the inn kept by the door for guests' recycling had been knocked onto its side, and scattered across the boards around it were the unmistakable remains of last night's fudge box from Perry's Nut House. The cardboard torn into ragged, deliberate strips, 3 of the individually wrapped pieces gone entirely and a 4th left behind, half unwrapped, as though the thief had lost interest partway through or simply run out of appetite. And there, pressed clean and perfect into the thin film of dew on the porch boards, were the tracks. "Carol," Nancy called back through the door, "you're going to want to see this. Feel this. Whichever." Carol came out in her robe, Kane finding the porch steps with practiced ease, and knelt without being asked the moment Nancy described the scene, her fingers finding the nearest print and going very still, reading it the way she read everything that mattered. "That's not a paw," Carol said slowly. "That's a hand. 5 fingers, a real palm shape, not claws and pads like a dog would leave. Small, narrower than mine." She traced the outline once more, checking herself. Whatever left, this had actual fingers to work with. Mary, arriving in the doorway with her cardigan thrown over her nightshirt, crouched to look and made a small, delighted sound. "Raccoon," she said with the flat certainty of a Floridian who had spent 30 years losing garbage can battles to the same species. "That's exactly what our trash cans look like most Tuesday mornings. They've got hands almost as good as ours, practically, and they know how to use them. Latches, jar lids, zippers if you leave a cooler unattended long enough." She looked down at the small hand-shaped print, and her expression softened. "We had one when I was little, in Skowhegan. My mother found her orphaned behind our house. Tiny thing, all ribs and eyes. She kept her warm by the stove and fed her until she was strong enough to go free." "Moma," Mary said, smiling at the name. "That's what we called her. She could come and go as she pleased once she was grown, but she never really left us. Most evenings she came back to the woods behind the house, and my mother fed her." Mary was quiet a moment, her fingers still resting near the print. "My mother used to say, Moma taught her more about raising children than any book ever did. That you couldn't force a wild thing to stay. You could only make the staying worth its while, and hope it decided the choosing was worth making. Over and over. Every single evening." She smiled, a little rueful. "I didn't understand what she meant until I had Chris of my own. I understand it perfectly well now." "An unofficial pet," Carol said. "Exactly." Mary touched one fingertip lightly to the edge of the print. "Free as anything. But she always came home. It went through cardboard like it had a plan." Nancy examined the shredded fudge box with something that looked almost like respect. Mary nodded. "They're smarter than people give them credit for. Chris had one get into the garage twice one summer, working the door handle like it had watched us do it. We finally had to get a latch a raccoon couldn't figure out, and even that took 2 tries. He figured out how to open the first so-called child-proof handle. Carol, still crouched over the tracks, worked her way along the porch boards with her fingertips, following the tacky chocolate smears and the occasional small, hand-shaped impression the way she might follow a sentence carved in stone. At the railing, she stopped. Chocolate had been pressed onto the wood at roughly waist height. "It climbed up here," she said, "and sat, I'd guess, right about where I'm touching, working on whatever it managed to steal, before it went back over the rail the way it came." She sat back on her heels, entirely pleased with herself. "I believe we have just solved our first main mystery, ladies, and it took considerably less time than I expected mysteries to take." Patty, appearing at the side door in her own robe with a mug of coffee already in hand, took one look at the scene and laughed, the easy laugh of a woman who had seen this exact tableau many times before. "That'll be Bandit," she said. "Or one of Bandit's several equally shameless relations, more likely, though everybody around here just calls whichever one shows up Bandit, out of tradition more than accuracy. He's been raiding porches up and down this street since August. Somebody left a bird feeder unlatched 2 doors down, and I believe it changed his whole outlook on what porches are for." She nodded at the ruined fudge box. "I'll get you gals a proper lidded bin for anything sweet-smelling going forward. Learned the hard way myself. My first season running this place, that a determined raccoon considers a loose latch more of a suggestion than an obstacle." "Is he dangerous?" Mary asked. "Bandit's never bitten anybody that I've heard of, and he generally clears out the second a light comes on. Mostly he's just embarrassing, for whoever finds the evidence in the morning and has to admit a wild animal outsmarted their snack storage." Patty sipped her coffee, eyeing the shredded cardboard with the fond exasperation of a long acquaintance. "You'll want to keep anything smelling of butter or sugar in a hard case from here on, is the lesson. He's partial to Perry's fudge in particular. Word seems to have gotten around, animal to animal, that the tourists always come back from that place with something worth the climb. A raccoon with a sweet tooth and a professional's technique," Carol said, standing, brushing off her knees with real satisfaction. "I respect him already. I hope we meet properly before we leave." Nancy gave her a look. "You will not be encouraging that." "I would never encourage wildlife crime." Carol's chin lifted. "I would simply like to shake his hand. Or his paw. Whichever he offers." They cleaned up the scattered cardboard together, Mary already composing, out loud, the version of the story she intended to text Skip before breakfast. And Nancy, sweeping the last of the wrappers into the bin, found herself smiling in a way she hadn't quite expected to be smiling at 6:30 in the morning over a stolen box of fudge. "Well," she said, "that's one mystery closed before we've even had coffee. I'll take it as a good omen for the rest of the trip." She had no way of knowing, saying it, how much further from an easy answer the next one would prove to be. Chapter 6. The Loop Road. The next morning came up gray and cold, fog sitting low over the harbor so that the masts of the moored boats seemed to rise out of nothing, and by the time the gals had worked their way through Patty's promised popover sellout by 2 warning and a breakfast of blueberry pancakes at a diner 2 streets from the inn, the sun had begun to burn through in earnest, and the hillsides above Bar Harbor lit up in stages as it did. Gold first, then orange, then a red so deep it looked like the mountains were holding their breath. Nancy had slept badly, though she hadn't mentioned it. Some low, persistent hum of anticipation she couldn't quite place, the same restlessness that used to precede a long shift back when her body still kept a schedule shaped around other people's emergencies. She'd woken twice in the night to check the time on her phone for no reason she could name, and both times had lain in the dark afterward cataloging the unfamiliar sounds of the inn settling around her, an old habit that had never quite let her sleep as soundly in a strange bed as she did in her own. She kept coming back, uselessly, to a red life preserver on the tailgate of a stranger's truck, a detail with no evident reason to matter and every reason, apparently, to keep surfacing anyway. "Hall's Cove first," she announced now, holding the laminated park map at arm's length the way she held most things lately, squinting slightly. "Visitor Center, then the Loop. Road. Apparently, if you don't go in order, you have to do the whole thing twice. It's one way." "Heaven forbid we do anything twice," Carol said. "It's 27 miles, Nancy said. "I'm not doing 27 miles twice because we got sentimental about a viewpoint." "You say that now." She was, as it turned out, slightly wrong, though not in a way anyone held against her. The wild gardens of just past the visitor center at a place called Sir du Mohan, was the first stop that slowed them down properly. A network of small paths winding through plantings organized according to a sign to mirror the park's actual wild habitats in miniature: bog, meadow, woodland, mountain. Carol stood at the edge of the bog section for a long moment, head tilted, while Mary read the little engraved markers aloud. "Pitcher plant," Mary said. "Carnivorous. It traps insects in a pool of rainwater and digests them slowly." "That's diabolical," Carol said with clear admiration. "There's something called witch hazel a little further on." Mary paused, crouching slightly to read a smaller marker half hidden by dried bracken. "It blooms in fall. Yellow flowers, like threads, while everything else is dying back. The only thing that blooms this late." "A plant." Carol considered this. "I respect that kind of patience. Most things in nature seem to be in a tremendous hurry." "Not everything," Mary said, and something in the way she said it made Carol turn her head. But Mary had already moved on to the next marker, and the moment passed the way most moments did, unremarked. She had stopped a little further along the path, in front of a tall, feathery plant she recognized before she read the marker. Not by name exactly, but by the specific quality of beauty that made her want to lean in closer. It was still going, well into October, its long wands of tiny yellow flowers catching the pale morning light like something lit from inside. "Goldenrod," she said, reading the small sign. "Solidago. One of the last native plants to bloom before frost." She looked up at it. The flowers were extraordinary, dense, and intricate, and almost too yellow, the color of something that had decided to be emphatic about itself before winter arrived. Mary leaned in slightly and then sneezed. Once, violently, then again. Then, a third time, with the helpless, unstoppable quality of a sneeze that has committed to its course and will not be talked out of it. "Bless you," Carol said. "Thank you," Mary said, straightening, eyes watering. "I'm not sure what—" She sneezed again. Nancy was already a few steps back, looking at something else. Her attention caught the way it always seemed to catch on the small print rather than the large display. "There's ragweed in the same bed," she said, reading a second marker half hidden behind the goldenrod stems. "Inconspicuous. Greenish flowers. Wind-pollinated." She paused. "One plant can produce 1 billion grains of pollen per season." "1 billion," Carol said. "1 billion," Nancy confirmed. Mary sneezed a 5th time and looked at the goldenrod with the expression of someone who had fallen for a beautiful, blameless decoy. "It's not even the goldenrod," she said. "No," Nancy agreed. "The goldenrod just stands there looking guilty while the ragweed does all the actual damage." She tilted her head, filing it away the way she filed everything, some small permanent shelf in her mind, labeled things that look responsible and aren't. "Useful life skill, that." Mary glanced at her. "You mean noticing who gets blamed?" "I mean noticing when the obvious answer is too convenient," Nancy said. "Usually somebody benefits from it." She said it casually, then moved on before either of them could ask why she sounded so certain. Mary accepted a tissue from her purse and looked at the ragweed, which was as unassuming and easily overlooked a plant as she had ever seen. Then she looked at the goldenrod again. Vivid, emphatic, impossible to miss. "Some things," she said, "get blamed for things they didn't do." Neither of them said anything to that. The goldenrod went on being yellow in the pale October light, entirely unconcerned. Nancy, a few steps ahead, had stopped at a planting of low, glossy-leaved shrubs and was reading the marker with the stillness she reserved for things that mattered more than they appeared to. "Teaberry," she read, "also called checkerberry. The leaves were used to flavor medicine before synthetic wintergreen existed." She crouched and, after a glance at the small sign permitting it, plucked a single leaf, crushed it gently between two fingers, and held it out toward Carol. "Smell this." Carol leaned in and inhaled. Her whole face changed. "Oh, that's exactly like the gum. The pink kind. I didn't know that came from somewhere real." "Everything comes from somewhere real," Nancy said. "We just forget to ask where." She said it lightly, but something in her own words caught at her for a second afterward. An odd little snag she couldn't place, gone again before she could examine it. By the time they reached Sand Beach, the fog had burned off entirely, and the cove spread out below the parking area in a long crescent of pale sand, startling among all the dark granite around it, the water a blue so deep and clean it looked almost unreal. "It's freezing," a teenager announced to no one in particular, wading out of the surf with the outrage of someone who had not expected New England water to behave like New England water. Carol tipped her face toward the sound of the water. "That is not Florida surf," she said. "No," Mary said. "It's darker. The waves come in harder, and the beach is tucked between these black cliffs." Carol listened another moment, smiling faintly. "You can hear the difference. Florida's water arrives politely. This water sounds like it has somewhere to be." "Good," Carol said when Mary relayed this. "I'd hate for it to be easy." They didn't linger long, a walk along the edge of the sand, Carol's cane finding the harder-packed ground near the waterline with a few quick taps, Mary narrating the cliffs rising on either side of the cove, the gulls wheeling overhead with their flat, complaining cries, before piling back into the car for Thunderhole, which Nancy had read was best experienced an hour or so before high tide, a detail she'd apparently memorized along with the tide tables for the entire week, "because I'm not driving back out here twice for a sound effect." The tide cooperated. They stood at the railing above the narrow inlet, waiting, the water below drawing back in a long glassy pull that Nancy found herself bracing against without quite knowing why. Some old animal part of her reading the pause the way you'd read the silence before a siren. A reflex left over, she supposed, from 30 years of learning that the quiet moment right before something happened had its own particular texture, one her body still recognized even now that nothing was actually coming. Then it came. A wall of gray water slammed into the back of the narrow rock chamber, trapping the air inside and forcing it out all at once in a boom that came up through the soles of Nancy's feet before it ever reached her ears, and a plume of white spray shot 20 feet into the air and hung there for one long instant before it collapsed back down across the railing, across all three of them, cold enough to steal the breath clean out of her chest. Her glasses fogged and speckled with salt in the same half-second. The boom itself she felt more than heard, a deep, concussive thud against her sternum that rattled all the way to her back teeth. Carol gripped the railing, her face turned straight up into the spray, entirely unbothered by the cold shock of it. "Oh," she said. "Oh, that's wonderful. Do it again." "It's an ocean, not a vending machine," Nancy said, wiping her glasses on the wet hem of her jacket, which did very little good. "It'll do it again when it's good and ready." It did, twice more, each one a little different. One, a low, disappointing cough that barely cleared the rocks. The next, a full, chest-deep boom that soaked all three of them to the shoulder and left Nancy laughing despite herself, salt on her lips, her ears ringing pleasantly in the aftermath. Some tight, coiled thing in her chest she hadn't quite noticed carrying loosening for a moment in the sheer, uncomplicated joy of it. And each time Carol laughed out loud, delighted, until a man nearby, 60s, a Patriot's cap, a camera with a lens longer than his forearm, said, "First time hearing it?" And Carol said yes, and he said, with the quiet pride of someone who'd clearly been coming here for decades, "Best sound in Maine. Better than the ocean anywhere else I've been, and I've been most places." And wandered off before anyone could ask him to defend that claim. Nancy watched him go, filing the small, unbothered certainty of him away the way she filed most things now, and thought, not for the first time since they'd landed, that this was a place that seemed to specialize in people who knew exactly what they believed, and felt no need to argue anyone else into believing it too. Chapter 7. What the Wind Knows. Ottercliff came next, the granite rising sheer and pink gold out of the water, climbers in harnesses working their way up one face of it with the unhurried patience of people who did this for fun. Carol asked to touch the rock itself before they moved on, and Mary led her to a low outcropping safely back from the edge, where Carol knelt and ran her palm across the surface, feeling out the coarse, sparkling grain of it. "It's warmer than I expected," she said. "The sun's been on it all morning, I suppose, and rougher than the stones at home. More crystal in it, almost gritty." She traced a thin dark seam running through the pink. "What's this line?" "A different kind of rock, pushed up through the granite a long time ago," Nancy said, reading from a small interpretive plaque bolted nearby, the dispatcher in her unable to resist a posted fact. "A basalt dike," it says, "cooled faster than the rock around it, so it stayed dark instead of going pink. Two different rocks that decided to become one thing," Carol said, tracing the seam once more before standing. "I like that better than the sign's explanation, but I'll allow they're describing the same event." They drove on, the long, easy stretch around toward Jordan Pond, where the water lay flat and glass-still beneath the two round-shouldered mountains the map called the Bubbles. The whole scene reflected back at itself with such precision that for a moment, coming around the last bend, Nancy genuinely couldn't tell where the mountain ended and its reflection began. "We're not doing popovers until tomorrow," Nancy reminded them as Carol's head turned hopefully toward the restaurant building visible across the lawn. "Patty said 2 o'clock cutoff. We'll never make it today, not with Cadillac left to do." "I can smell them from here," Carol said. "Butter, eggs, something like a Yorkshire pudding, but proud of itself." "Tomorrow," Nancy said again, firmly, and Carol sighed the sigh of a woman setting aside a great injustice for the good of the group. It was on the walk back toward the parking area along the edge of the pond path that they saw him for the first time, though none of them in the moment thought of it as a first time at all. Just a man in a green uniform crouched at the edge of the trail, clipboard balanced on one knee, doing something careful and unhurried to a stretch of low plants growing right up against the gravel. "Excuse me," Mary said, slowing. "Are we allowed through here, or is this—" "Oh, sure, sure." He looked up, squinting against the sun, and got to his feet in one easy motion, brushing dirt from his knees. Mid-30s, maybe. Weathered the way someone gets who spends most of his working life outside, a ranger's patch on his shoulder. "Sorry, didn't mean to block the path. Just doing a count." "A count of what?" Nancy asked because Nancy always asked, some old reflex that had never once let an unexplained detail pass without at least one follow-up question. Moose. He nodded toward the tree line at the far end of the pond. Fall monitoring. We track movement patterns through October, where they're browsing, what corridors they're using, whether anyone is showing signs of winter tick load. Mostly I'm out here reading browse lines. How high up a shrub or a young tree gets stripped bare tells you what's been feeding there and how hard a winter it's had. You can tell a lot from the trails they leave if you know what you're looking at. Do you actually see them? Mary asked. Out here on the island. Occasionally. Owen stood, brushing his knees. Mount Desert Island isn't prime moose habitat. They prefer the northern and western woods, where the logging operations create young forest growth they can browse on. Moose eat browse. Young birch, aspen, mountain ash, willow. They need a lot of it. A bull can weigh 1,200 pounds. When they show up in Acadia, they're usually young animals pushed out of their range, or occasionally ones that have wandered in during the rut. And the brainworm? Carol asked. She said it with complete composure, the way she said most things. You mentioned it. Parasite, Owen said. Carried by white-tailed deer which are immune to it. Moose aren't. It gets into the nervous system and causes damage. The animal loses its fear of humans, starts walking in circles, ends up places it wouldn't normally go. We see it occasionally here. An animal that wanders onto the island seems not quite right. He paused. It's not a good way to go. He laughed, a real laugh, easy, and Nancy, who had been only half listening, half still cataloging the trail behind them out of old habit, looked over at the sound of it, and found herself, for just a moment, cataloging something else entirely. The unhurried way he held himself, the plain competence of a man who clearly knew exactly what his own hands were for. She filed the observation the way she filed everything, without quite admitting to herself that she'd made it. I'm Owen, he said. Woods. Ranger here. Well, everywhere on the island, technically, but mostly this end of it. Nancy said, and then, because it seemed only fair, Woods is a good name for the job. I get that a lot, Owen said, with the faint, easy resignation of a man who had clearly gotten that a lot. Worse things to be teased about, I figure. Much worse, Nancy agreed. There was a small pause then, the kind that didn't mean anything yet, the kind that happened 100 times a day between strangers who would never see each other again. Except that Owen glanced once more at the lady's slippers, and once more at Nancy, and said, You all heading up Cadillac. Best lights in about an hour, if you've got the reservation. We do, Mary said. Watch for moose on the way up, this time of day. They like the wet ditches along the road. He paused. And give them a lot of room if you see one. This time of year the bulls are in rut, September through mid-October. They're not themselves. How not themselves? Nancy asked. A bull moose in rut weighs over 1,000 pounds and has one thing on his mind. Owen said it evenly, the way rangers say things they have said many times and which are nonetheless true. Normally they'll hear you coming and move off. During rut, they don't always. There was a man up in Allagash a couple years back. Antler scavenger, knew the woods, knew moose. Walked into a clearing and found a bull with 3 cows. Big animal. 16-point rack. He tried to back out. The moose side-eyed him for about 30 seconds, then charged. What happened? Carol asked, her face turned toward Owen with the still complete attention she gave to things that mattered. He went down. Moose stomped him a few times, decided it was done, walked away. Man had some bumps and bruises, said he was extremely lucky. The video went viral. Owen looked at them each in turn. The rule is, Unlike with a bear, you can run from a moose. They usually won't chase you far, but don't let vanity slow you down. The people who get hurt are the ones who try to get the photograph. Another time, he continued, and there was something in his voice that suggested he had more of these than he would need, a woman in Bar Harbor came out of the grocery store and found a cow moose standing between her and her car. Just standing there. Cow moose are generally calmer than bulls, but they're still 6 feet at the shoulder and they'll use their front hooves if they feel cornered. The woman waited 45 minutes before it moved. 45 minutes, Mary said. She had ice cream in the bag, Owen said. She was not happy about it. Nancy, who had been listening with the focused, evaluating attention she gave to credible threat assessments, nodded once. Good to know. They're extraordinary animals, Owen added. He said it without sentimentality, the way you state a fact that deserves to be said plainly. Largest member of the deer family. They've been here since before the roads. They'll be here after. We just have to remember we're the ones visiting. We will, Carol said, and as they walked on, she added, quietly, to no one in particular, he had a nice voice. Steady. The kind you'd want reading you directions in a thunderstorm. I didn't notice, Nancy said, which was, Mary thought, glancing sideways at her, almost certainly not true, and Nancy herself, walking a half step ahead of the other two so neither of them could read her face, thought the same thing about herself and declined, for the moment, to do anything about it. The summit of Cadillac Mountain delivered exactly what the brochures promised. Bare, pink granite, stretching in every direction, scrubby pine clinging to the cracks, and a view that took in the whole curve of Frenchman Bay. Islands scattered across the water like something poured rather than placed. Bar Harbor, small and toy-like, far below. The wind up top had real weight to it, cold and constant, and Carol crouched at one point to press her palm flat against the bare rock, feeling the last of the day's warmth still trapped in the stone, despite the wind working hard to strip it away. They say this is the first place in the country to see the sunrise, Mary said, reading from her phone. Part of the year, anyway. People camp out for it. I am categorically not doing that, Nancy said. I didn't ask you to. You were going to. I was thinking about it, Mary admitted, and Carol laughed, and the three of them stood at the railing in the wind, the granite cold and solid under their feet even through their shoes, and looked out at all of it. The bay, the islands, the long green finger of land reaching out to the east that the map called, in small, unassuming type, the Skudik Peninsula. Nancy's eyes rested on it a moment longer than the rest of the view warranted, some old instinct turning the shape of the coastline over the way she'd once turned over an unfamiliar street name on a call, cataloging it before she had any reason to. That's the quiet side, she said. The honey and jam from the nut house, the map. Maybe we'll get out there before the week's up, Mary said again, the way she'd said it once already and would say it once more before either of them thought to wonder why it kept needing saying. Maybe, Nancy agreed, and the wind took the word and carried it off toward the water, toward the peninsula sitting amber and patient and entirely unaware, for one more day, that it was about to be found. Chapter 8. What the Woods Know. They made it to Jordan Pond House before 10, well ahead of Patty's dire 2 o'clock warning, and were seated on the lawn in white folding chairs with a view of the pond and the bubbles rising beyond it. The hillsides above them gone gold and copper in the October light, a pot of tea between them and a basket of popovers that arrived so improbably tall and golden that Carol insisted on holding one in both hands, before she'd let anyone butter it for her. Nancy had already spent an hour walking the quiet side of the Jordan Pond path with Owen. No fisher in sight, and no particular excuse needed for the conversation to continue past the point where he might reasonably have turned back. By the time she found Mary and Carol at breakfast, she had arrived with cold cheeks, an inexplicable amount of information about trail maintenance and osprey nesting habits, and a smile she had not been able to explain away as wind. Neither Mary nor Carol had pressed her about it. Carol had only said, "You're late," in a tone that made clear she knew exactly why, and Mary had passed Nancy the butter without comment. "It's like a little balloon," she said, turning it over. "How do they get it to do this?" "Eggs, mostly," Mary said, reading off the paper placemat, which apparently doubled as a brief history of the restaurant. "And a hot oven, and not opening the door too soon. They've been doing it exactly this way since 1895. "Some things shouldn't change," Carol said, and bit into it, and made a small, satisfied sound that needed no translation. Nancy ate hers more quickly, distracted, glancing every so often toward the gift shop building at the edge of the lawn, where a steady trickle of visitors went in empty-handed and came out with branded tote bags and tins of popover mix. "You're not going to want anything in there," Mary said, following her gaze. "I don't," Nancy agreed. "I have 4 magnets and a tea towel already this trip, and it's day 3. "That's restraint," Carol said. "I respect it. It's not restraint. It's that I genuinely don't want a popover-shaped oven mitt." After breakfast, Mary and Carol drifted toward the shop anyway. Carol on the theory that there was bound to be something with an interesting texture, Mary because she'd half promised Marcy a postcard from every stop, and Jordan Pond House seemed like the kind of place that would have a good one. And Nancy, standing at the edge of the lawn with the last of her tea going cold in its cup, found she had no interest in following them in. "I'm going to walk," she said, "just down by the water. I'll find you." "Take your phone," Carol said, already turning toward the shop door. "I always have my phone." "You say that like it's never once not been true," Mary said. But she was smiling, and Nancy was already moving, down off the lawn and onto the gravel path that curved along the near shore of the pond. The same stretch where they'd met the ranger the day before, quieter now in the cool of the morning, the water dead still, a heron standing motionless in the shallows like it had been carved there. She walked further than she meant to. That was the trouble with these trails. They didn't announce themselves the way a Florida path did, all flat, sun, and obvious edges. Here the trees came in close on either side, the path narrowing, the sound of the pond fading behind a screen of spruce and fern. And Nancy found herself thinking, not for the first time on this trip, about how strange it was to walk somewhere that didn't need her to be alert for anything. No calls coming in, no one waiting on the other end of a line, voice tight, needing her to stay calm so they could. Just trees, and the deep green hush of a place that had been quiet long before she arrived and would be quiet long after she left. She rounded a bend where the path dipped close to a fallen log, moss-thick and half-rotted, and stopped. Something was on it. For half a second her brain offered up large cat and rejected it just as fast. Too long in the body, too low and sinuous, a rich, dark brown coat with a face that was sharp and almost weasel-like, small rounded ears, black eyes that fixed on her with an attention that felt entirely too direct. It was perhaps 3 feet from nose to tail, crouched along the log not 10 feet from where she stood, and it did not run. Nancy went very still. Her pulse had jumped hard in her throat, a fast, thin hammering she could feel in her own ears, and some cold, clear part of her mind noted it with the same detachment she'd once used to note her own heart rate through a bad call. Elevated, not dangerous. Manage it. Even as the rest of her stood frozen on the path, every muscle locked. The animal's posture changed, a kind of low, coiled tension, head dropping slightly, and it made a sound she had never heard anything make before, somewhere between a hiss and a low, chattering growl, the fur along its spine lifting. Don't run. The thought arrived from somewhere old and useful, Some half-remembered piece of advice from a nature show or a camping trip decades back. Don't run. Don't turn your back. Make yourself. Don't move. The voice came from behind her, low and even, and she didn't turn because the voice had just told her not to, and some deep, dispatcher-trained part of her recognized instruction worth following when she heard it. Owen. Hey. He was closer now, she could tell by the sound, though still behind her. You're doing exactly the right thing. Just stay still a second. It's not running, Nancy said, and was faintly, distantly proud of how level her own voice came out, given that her heart was doing something closer to a sprint. That's a fisher. They don't usually act like this. They're shy. They want nothing to do with us, normally. His voice stayed unhurried, almost conversational, even as she heard him take one slow step nearer. My guess, you came around that bend faster than you meant to, and you're between her and her exit. She's not hunting you. She's just stuck. Comforting, Nancy said. Raise your arms, he said. Slowly. Make yourself a little bigger. And start backing up. Small steps. Don't turn your back on her yet. Just ease back the way you came. Nancy did exactly that, arms lifting, feet finding the path behind her with the kind of careful, deliberate motion she hadn't used since she didn't know when. And the fisher's black eyes tracked her, ears flat, that low, chattering sound continuing. And then as the distance opened, as the path behind it cleared, it dropped off the log in one fluid motion and was gone into the undergrowth, fast and silent, as though it had never been there at all. For a moment, neither of them moved. Okay, Owen said, and the careful steadiness went out of his voice all at once, replaced by something almost like relief. Okay, you can put your arms down. Nancy did. Her hands, she noticed with some detachment, were shaking slightly. That happens, he said, watching her notice it. Adrenaline. It's normal. I'm aware adrenaline is normal, she said. I've spent 30 years on the other end of other people's adrenaline. Right, the dispatcher thing. He came around to stand in front of her now, and up close she could see he looked nearly as rattled as she felt, for all his steady voice. Sorry, Mary mentioned it, on the trail yesterday. 30 years, she said. She talks too much, Nancy said without heat. She seems to like you a great deal, if it helps. Nancy let out a breath that was almost a laugh. It doesn't not help. They started back toward the pond together, slowly, Owen matching his pace to hers without seeming to think about it. For what it's worth, he said after a moment, that's a once-in-a-career sighting for most visitors. You'll never see one again, probably, not like that. I'm thrilled, Nancy said. Truly. You did everything right. A lot of people run. Running's the worst thing you can do. Triggers something in them, makes it a chase. He glanced sideways at her. You didn't run. I was considering it. Considering it and doing it are different things. He said it lightly, but there was something underneath it. Some genuine note of something not quite admiration, but close enough to it that Nancy felt it land somewhere she hadn't expected. They're not even really after people, he added a few steps later, like he couldn't quite let the subject go. Porcupines, mostly. Fishers are about the only thing built for it. They'll come at one from the front, again and again, dodging the tail until they can get at its weak points. Nothing else really bothers. That sounds like a terrible job, Nancy said. It's the job that keeps the woods standing, more or less. He held a branch aside for her without seeming to notice he was doing it. When trappers and habitat loss wiped fishers out of a lot of the Northeast back in the early part of the last century, the porcupines didn't have anything left to worry about. Numbers went up fast. And porcupines aren't tidy eaters. They girdle bark, strip the tender growth off young trees, kill them outright if there's enough of them doing it long enough. Whole stands of forest took the damage. Michigan actually had to bring fishers back in on purpose just to get the porcupines under control again. So the thing that just hissed at me is basically a forest ranger too, Nancy said. Better paid, in roadkill, Owen said, and Nancy, despite everything, laughed. They reached the edge of the lawn just as Mary and Carol emerged from the gift shop, Carol with a small paper bag swinging from one wrist, Mary already scanning the lawn with the focused look of someone counting heads. "There you are," Mary said, relief plain in her voice, and then taking in Owen and Nancy's slightly too careful composure and the general air of something having happened. "What did we miss?" "A fisher," Nancy said. "On the trail." It was close. "Close, how close?" Carol said sharply. 10 feet, Owen said. She handled it well. Genuinely. Carol turned her face toward him, the careful, still attention she gave to voices she was hearing for the first time properly. "You're the ranger. From yesterday." "Owen." "Yes." "You have a nice voice," Carol said with the same frank, unembarrassed directness she'd applied to it the day before, only now to his face. "I said so yesterday." Nancy claimed not to notice. "Carol," Nancy said, "and I'm only reporting the facts." Owen, to his credit, looked more delighted than embarrassed. "I'll take it as a compliment." It was meant as one. There was a small pause, the kind that had weight to it now. Unlike the one on the trail the day before, Mary watching Nancy with open curiosity, Carol smiling faintly toward the sound of Owen's voice. Owen himself glancing at Nancy with something that wasn't quite a question yet, but was getting close to one. "There's tea and popovers most mornings," he said finally, to Nancy specifically, "if you wanted to come back without the wildlife encounter attached. I'm usually through this part of the park by 10. I could show you the spot without the drama." "Are you asking me on a date?" Nancy said, "or offering me trauma-informed park services?" "Bit of both, if I'm honest." Mary, behind them, made a small sound that might have been a cough and might have been a laugh she was trying very hard to contain. Nancy considered him for a long moment. The steady voice, the calm under pressure, the way he'd talked her down off her own adrenaline without once making her feel foolish for having it, without once treating her fear as anything but ordinary and reasonable, which was, she realized, a kindness she hadn't been offered by very many people in 30 years of being the one who did the reassuring, and felt something settle in her chest that she hadn't felt in longer than she cared to admit. Something that had nothing at all to do with fishers, and everything to do with the strange, unfamiliar sensation of being the one allowed to be frightened. For once, instead of the one holding everyone else steady. "Tomorrow," she said, 10 o'clock. "I'll have already had breakfast, so don't expect me to be impressed by the popovers." "I'll do my best to be impressive on my own merits, then," Owen said, and there was real warmth in it, not performance. "We'll see," Nancy said, but she was smiling, and didn't try especially hard to hide it. He left them a few minutes later back toward the trail with a last glance over his shoulder, and Carol, the moment he was out of earshot, turned her face toward Nancy with an expression of pure, unrepentant delight. "Well," she said, "that escalated." "Nothing escalated," Nancy said. "I startled a woodland creature, and a man with a nice voice walked me back to the lawn and asked you to tea. It's a park thing. He probably does it for everyone who nearly gets eaten." "I doubt that very much," Mary said gently, and looped her arm through Nancy's as they started back toward the car along the near edge of the pond. Carol trailed a hand out as they walked, fingers grazing the tall, reedy stalks crowding the shallows, and stopped short, pulling one gently toward her. "What is this?" she said. It feels like a corn dog on a stick. Cattail, Mary said, laughing. They grow at the edge of ponds like this all over the country, though I don't think either of us has ever stood close enough to one to touch it before. We don't exactly have them lining our lakes back home. Carol turned it slowly under her fingers, working her way down the length of the brown, velvety head. It's so dense at this end, almost like felt. Her thumb found a spot further down where the casing had begun to split, and she went still with surprise as a wisp of pale fluff came away against her skin, soft as a dandelion gone to seed but finer, more like the down from inside a pillow. Oh, it's coming apart right here. This part's nothing like the rest of it. Feel this. Mary touched the fluff and made a small sound of delight. That's the seed. Comes apart like that once the weather turns and the wind just carries it off, hundreds of them at a time. A whole plant that turns itself into a snowstorm when it's finished, Carol said, turning the stalk once more to find the dense, unbroken end, and then the loose, cottony one, comparing the two textures with real absorption. I think that might be my favorite thing you've grown up here so far. It's got a better retirement plan than most people. She tucked the stalk carefully against her side rather than dropping it, the pond glinting beyond them, the bubbles standing soft and green against the morning sky, and none of them said anything else about Owen, because there was nothing else that needed saying. Not yet, only the small, warm certainty, shared between the three of them without a word, that something had just begun. Chapter 9. Hay and Honeycrisp. The sign appeared on their way back from breakfast, hand-painted on a sheet of plywood nailed to a fence post at the edge of a sprawling farm. Seavey's Orchard and Farm Stand. Hay rides Saturday to Sunday. Cider donuts. You pick apples. And Carol, who had heard Mary read it aloud, sat up so fast in the back seat that her seatbelt caught. "Turn around," she said. "We have a whole itinerary," Nancy said, though she was already checking her mirror. Your itinerary did not know about hay rides when it was written. It is entitled to be revised in light of new information. Carol's chin was set at the angle she reserved for arguments she considered already won. "Turn around, Nancy." Nancy turned around. The farm sprawled back from the road in rolling fields gone gold-green with the last of the season's growth, split-rail fencing following the contours of the land, and beyond the fields, a line of hills rising soft and hazy in the late morning light, their slopes patched with the full range of October color, crimson and rust, and a yellow so bright it looked lit from within. Enormous, round bales of hay sat scattered across the near field like something dropped from a great height, each one taller than a person, their cut ends showing pale gold against the darker, weathered curve of the outer wrap. A wagon stood hitched near the barn, 2 draft horses in the traces. Broad, patient animals, chestnut-colored with feathered white socks and the calm, unhurried presence of creatures who had done this exact job 10,000 times, and found no particular reason to hurry through it an additional time today. "Oh," Carol said, the moment she was out of the car, her face turning toward the horses before Mary had even said a word about them. "I can smell them from here." "Belgians, looks like," said a woman coming out of the barn, wiping her hands on her jeans, weathered and cheerful in the way of someone who spent every daylight hour outdoors and had made peace with it decades ago. "Ruby and Duchess. Ruby's the mouthy one. She'll tell you all about herself if you let her." "May I?" Carol said, already moving toward the sound of shifting hooves and the low, huffing breath of something enormous. "Go right ahead. She loves the attention." Carol's hand found the horse's nose first, and Ruby, living up to her reputation, immediately pushed forward into the touch, nearly knocking Carol back a step with sheer companionable weight. Carol laughed, delighted, and ran her palm up along the long bony plane of the horse's face, over the soft, impossibly velvet muzzle, down to where the whiskers bristled stiff and coarse around her lips. "She's so soft here," Carol said, "and so rough just an inch over, like two completely different animals stitched together at the seam." She found the mane next, coarse and thick under her fingers. Nothing at all like the fine hair she'd half expected, and Ruby, unbothered, blew a great warm huff of air across her wrist that made her jump and laugh again in the same breath. "She likes you," the woman said. "Climb aboard whenever you're ready. Wagon's about to head out for the 11 o'clock. The wagon itself was simple. A flatbed on rubber tires, hay bales arranged as benches along both sides. A family with two small children already settled at one end, the children pink-cheeked and bouncing with the pure energy of kids who had correctly identified this as the best part of their whole day. Mary and Carol took the bench nearest the front. Nancy climbed up after them, and the farmer's husband, a lean, quiet man in suspenders, clicked his tongue at the horses, and the wagon lurched forward with a creak of old wood and new enthusiasm. The hay under them was rough and prickly through Nancy's jeans, sharp-edged in a way that was almost unpleasant and almost pleasant at once, and Carol ran her palm flat against the bale beside her, feeling the dense, springy give of it, the individual stalks poking stiff against her skin. "It's nothing like the bales back home," she said. "Not that we have bales back home, but I felt straw in a garden center. This is denser, heavier. That's because it's real hay, cut and cured proper, not decoration," the farmer's husband said, without turning around from the reins. "Straw's the stalk left over after grain's harvested. Hollow, light, mostly good for bedding. Hay's the whole plant, cut green and dried, and it's got weight because it's still got the good part in it. Feed, not filler. A whole plant that's still got the good part in it," Carol repeated, turning the phrase over with evident satisfaction. "I like that as a description of quite a lot of things." The wagon rolled out past the near pasture and along the edge of a field where a dozen more of the great round bales sat waiting, casting long morning shadows across grass gone silver with dew. And Mary, watching the hills rise beyond them in their patchwork of color, said, "You could paint this and nobody would believe you hadn't exaggerated the colors." "Nobody paints it right," the farmer's husband agreed. "Cameras don't get it either. My wife's tried for 30 years. Something about actual daylight the equipment just won't hold on to." He nodded toward a stand of maples blazing red along a stone wall. "That wall's older than the road. Older than the farm, probably. Somebody cleared this field by hand, stone by stone, and stacked it into something useful instead of hauling it off. Waste not." The children at the far end shrieked with laughter as the wagon hit a rut, and Duchess flicked her tail with placid indifference to the whole enterprise, and the ride wound on through 2 more fields and a stretch of trail through the tree line, the horses' hooves striking a slow, unhurried rhythm against packed dirt before curving back toward the barn a full 20 minutes later, unhurried the entire way. The orchard sat behind the barn, rows of trees marching back toward the tree line in orderly ranks, some heavy-laden and glossy with fruit, others already picked clean and bare, and the whole place smelled, Nancy noticed it the moment they came through the gate, of something rich and sweet and faintly fermented, the specific perfume of windfall apples going soft in the grass beneath the trees. "That's the smell," Mary said, breathing deep. "That's exactly the smell of my grandmother's yard in September, and I haven't thought about it in 40 years until just now." They were handed canvas bags at the gate and a laminated card explaining which rows held which variety. Cortland, Macoun, Honeycrisp, an old heirloom called Black Oxford that the card described with evident local pride as nearly black when fully ripe and worth every minute of the wait. Carol reached up into the nearest laden branch and found an apple by touch before anyone had told her where to look, her fingers reading the shape of it against the leaves. "This bark," she said, pausing first with her other hand flat against the trunk, is nothing like the birch we've been seeing everywhere. Rougher, more broken up, like it's been through something. Apple bark does that, the woman running the register at the little farm stand called over, having followed them out to check on the group. Old trees especially. This row's 40 years old if it's a day. The younger ones over there, she pointed, still have that smoother gray bark. You can feel the difference tree to tree, if you go looking for it. Carol did go looking for it, moving down the row with one hand trailing from trunk to trunk, cataloging the change, smooth going rough, rough going deeply furrowed, with the same careful attention she gave everything worth knowing properly, while Mary filled a bag with Cortland's and Nancy after some consideration, filled hers with Honeycrisp, on the theory that a name that confident deserved to be tested. The apple, when she bit into it, snapped rather than gave, a clean, loud crack followed by a rush of juice so sharp and cold and sweet all at once that she made an involuntary sound of surprise. "That's nothing like a grocery store apple," she admitted. "Nothing is," the register woman said, with the patient satisfaction of someone who had watched this exact realization dawn on customers 10,000 times, and never once tired of it. "You want the donuts before you go. Fried this morning, cider glaze while they're still warm. There's a reason people drive an hour out of their way for them." The donuts, still faintly warm, were dense and cakey and smelled overwhelmingly of cinnamon and hot oil, and Carol ate hers in 4 decisive bites, declared it, around the last of it, worth every mile of that flight, and licked cider glaze from her thumb with an entirely unself-conscious satisfaction that made both Mary and Nancy laugh out loud. They left an hour later than planned, canvas bags heavy with apples, a jug of fresh cider sweating in the cup holder, and the whole car smelling faintly of hay and cinnamon for the rest of the day, and none of them apologized for the lost time, because some detours, Nancy was beginning to understand, were not detours at all. She thought of the laminated map still folded in her bag, the neat blocks of time she'd assigned each stop before they'd ever left Florida, and found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she couldn't summon much loyalty to the version of the day the map had promised over the one she'd actually gotten. It was not, she reflected, a realization she would have predicted having, 3 days into a trip she'd planned down to the tide tables. She decided not to examine it too closely and ate another apple instead.